is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live the wee hours of a Tuesday morning in October to recap the Ravens' dismantling of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 41-31. The score was closer than this one was in reality, which has been the story for a few of these Ravens wins because of some fourth quarter dramatics, which we will get into. We'll get into the Ravens' dominant offensive performance, 5 touchdowns for Lamar Jackson, and the Ravens picking up their 5th win in a row. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. With a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. Jonas, I have picked the word of the day in this case. You disagree with my selection here. You want to go with cornucopia. I said, let's save that for closer to Thanksgiving, the Horn of Plenty, because the options were plentiful for the Ravens offense. I went with poison because there's been a lot of talk recently about this pick your poison offense. The definition, a substance with inherent property that tends to destroy life or impair health. The origin, first recorded in 1200 to 1250 Middle English. A lot of our words come from that time period. 1200 to 1250 comes from the Latin originally. And Jonas, for all of the talk about pick your poison, and this Ravens team can beat you so many different ways through the air, on the ground, it seemed like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just decided to ingest all of the poison at once in this one.
Paul, you're such a thespian with your appetite for talking about poisons.
It's very Shakespearean.
Yeah. I'll leave you to quote Othello or Romeo and Juliet or whatever thing involved. What was the very old school serum that would get hemlock, right? Hemlock was poured into people's ears. How is this for hemlock? 244 yards rushing, 8.1 per carry, 281 yards passing, minus a little for the sacks and stuff, for 12.8 per attempt. This is just an absurd offense, Paul. Absurd. I just checked before we went on. The Ravens are averaging 7.2 yards per play. That's more than the greatest show on turf Rams. That's more than the 2018 Chiefs, who I think won Super Bowl. The 2011 Saints with Drew Brees. That was the year that kind of passing offenses just across the league broke out, and I think Brees had an absolutely incredible season. So what we are seeing from the Ravens right now, from Lamar, from the offensive line, pass catchers, runners, blockers, and yes, that even includes Lamar, is just ridiculous. And I pray and I hope that the Ravens are able to stay healthy, because what we are being treated to every single Sunday/Monday/ in a couple weeks Thursday night is just a treat to behold. And obviously the defense does its part to make sure some of these games are actually competitive shootouts. But what else can you do but marvel at a team that averages, I think it was 10 yards per play when Lamar was on the field there tonight?
It was absurd. And consider the opponent, too, because when they blew out the Dallas Cowboys in another game that got a little too close for comfort, ended up being a 5-point win, but it was a blowout for most of that game. That's a team that is struggling to stop the run all season. Their defense has been a problem all season. At the Bengals, the overtime win where they put up 41 points, that's another team that the secondary is very, very suspect. And last week, the 7-point win against the Commanders, that's another team that has a very young secondary, very young defense, and is going to struggle to keep opponents under 25, 30 points a week. This is a Todd Bowles-led Tampa Bay team, and they're going into Tampa and check both those boxes for another NFC win, another primetime win for Lamar Jackson. But this is not many teams do this to Todd Bowles-led teams. Todd Bowles is considered a mastermind defensively, and for him to be utterly at a loss for how to stop this Ravens offense to the point where they put up 500 plus yards of offense, he scores 5 touchdowns through the air. in a game where Derrick Henry was almost a non-factor in the first half. 4 carries for 23 yards in the first half. The Ravens blew them out through the air in the first half, then settled in for the run, and Derrick Henry just essentially making Tampa Bay Buccaneers defenders make business decisions, breaking the will of that Bucs defense. This was an utterly dominant performance from start to finish from this Ravens offense. Aside for essentially the 0 point first quarter, 17 in the second quarter, 17 in the third quarter. And if it wasn't for some late game antics from Baker Mayfield, this would have been a much, much larger margin of victory.
The only caveat that I would add in defense of Todd Bowles, and I feel like a bit of a broken record at this point because I keep mentioning the state of the other team's secondary or injury report or whatever. But, Tampa Bay lost Jamel Dean, one of their top 2 outside cornerbacks in that big win against the Saints last week. And then early in the first half, they lost Tyke Smith, their slot cornerback, to a concussion. So, in a way that we've seen play out time and time again, when Lamar gets against these wounded animal defenses, especially in prime time, he is going for the freaking jugular, and he does not miss. I mean, that doesn't minimize his accomplishments. I just want to, have that qualifier in there. But listen, he was like, I think probably either one completion for 0 yards or maybe like 3 or 4 yards in total passing yards away from a 158.3 passer rating. I think he was 158.1 tonight. I think that would have been the third of his career, which either has never been done by any quarterback or has been done only like by a very, very select few. So, and it seems like it always happens in these very, very big stages. I mean, we can get into the Monday Night Footballness of it all, but 20 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Obviously, tonight he did have the kind of clumsy backwards pass that turned into the turnover after Zay Flowers missed it. But the level of dominance that he is showing on these like venerable stages where you've got tens of millions of people watching in, and he says that it's just like any other game for him, but he goes out there and just turns these primetime matchups into his personal playground. You have an argument that like he is in the modern era the greatest Monday Night Football quarterback of all time. I know that's not something that really goes on a person's Hall of Fame credentials, but I think it bears pointing out after a night like this where he just goes supernova against a team that had like top 11, top 12 defensive DVOA coming into tonight.
I've spoken about before, if he could only get to the Super Bowl, he'd win it because of how good he is against NFC opponents. Can they have the Super Bowl on a Monday night? That's my next proposition. Or could they have some of the playoff games on Monday nights in order to get him into the Super Bowl? I mean, aside from that first drive where he goes,
maybe if they play it in England and it's like a Monday morning so that we get it on a Sunday night, that would technically qualify. But I don't think they're going to be moving Super Bowl Sunday to Super Bowl Monday at any point.
No, but I do think they could be moving the Super Bowl to England. We could be hearing about that at some point in the future. You never know. Yeah, I mean, what he was doing through the air in this game, 17 for 22, 281 passing yards, those 5 passing touchdowns that mentioned, as well as 9 carries for 52 yards on the ground. He was dropping the ball in the bucket. I think of those passes, those deep balls to Rashod Bateman. One was a 60-yard bomb in the second quarter. It was beautiful job by Rashod Bateman to come back on that ball that was perhaps a little bit underthrown because Lamar's running over to his right. And then again, a 49-yard bomb for the touchdown in the third quarter when Lamar just sits back. He's got all day to throw, and he just heaves a perfect ball and drops it right in the bucket for Rashod Bateman. And I got to give you credit, Jonas. You have been banging the drum throughout the preseason, throughout training camp, about Rashod Bateman having a bounce back season. And he has absolutely delivered and more in a game where the Ravens didn't get a whole lot from Zay Flowers. 1 rush for 19 yards and 1 catch for 11 yards. Although that rush was pretty sweet and shifty before he was temporarily injured and then came back. Rashod Bateman was the star of the show on offense, at least in the first half.
Yeah, and a quick note on Zay. Our colleague Gianna Han was in the locker room afterward. Obviously, there was a little bit of trepidation early on about Zay's ankle after I guess it got rolled up on. Yeah, I think you had a better view than I did watching from home, Paul. But obviously a relatively quiet night. Not that they needed him, but Zay, according to Gianna, kind of jokingly took himself out of consideration for a post-game interview because he said he needed to, go get the medical checks that are typical of injured guys. And then he, according to Gianna, kind of put on some affect in just how he was gimping around the locker room. But obviously, these are world-class doctors. The Ravens would not have thrown him out there for the second quarter, the second half, if they did not think that he was playable. But obviously the story for tonight is not just Rashod Bateman, career high in receiving yards, longest pass by air yards of Lamar's season. I think it was like 48 yards through the air on that 49-yard or 50-yard touchdown. Who, by the way, he was beating Zion McCollum, who we talked about on Thursday's pod, PFF's #1 rated cornerback. So it's not like he was beating up on the guys who were replacing, Tyke Smith or Jamel Dean. That was Tampa Bay's #1 with a bullet cornerback. But also shout out to Mark Andrews. Obviously it's not like he went anywhere close to 100 yards, but for him to be the first guy to catch a touchdown and get this thing going and have it be the one that set the career receiving record, breaking a record that Todd Heap set long ago, and then to go and get a second one on a 4th and 3 from the 4-yard line when the Ravens were already up, 17 points, I think, late in that third quarter. Mark he seemed kind of nonplussed about it afterwards when I asked him, yeah, of course we went for it. But, this is a team that with Lamar and Todd Monken and John Harbaugh and just this Tampa Bay defense on its heels, why not go for the throat like that? Why not just try to stomp out the hope of the team? And, honestly, it kind of mattered toward the end because things got a little bit dicey there at the end when the defense decided that it couldn't really stop a goal.
Yeah. We'll get to the to that fourth quarter awkwardness as well in a little bit. But, it feels cheap to say that the Ravens always knew that this was possible from Rashod Bateman. They took him with a first-round pick. They extended him this past offseason. They've always talked about how he has been one of the more underrated players and he just needs to stay healthy. I mean, you look at what he's done this year and the massive jump in production that he's had. I mean, was OBJ just taking targets away from Rashod Bateman last year? I know Bateman was coming back from the Liz Frank last year, so he was not the same health-wise that he is right now, and he's talked about how he feels much better this season than he did last year. But have the Ravens just been holding him back for a little bit too long, and they've just been, now they have all the pieces where Lamar is the best passing quarterback that he's been in terms of his career. They have the right guys pushing the right buttons in Todd Monken in this offense to the point where now they can just take the brakes off Rashod Bateman and say, go get it.
I think looking back at last year and Todd Monken, I forget if he said this toward the end of the season or during offseason availability, but he mentioned that it was tough to find a role for Rashod because OBJ was getting a lot of those snaps at the X, and Rashod, by virtue of missing a lot of training camp, a lot of offseason workouts because he was coming back from that foot injury, just did not really have, I think, either the chemistry with Lamar that we now see is readily apparent, nor the trust from Todd Monken or maybe even John Harbaugh. And it took a while to get that trust. When I did my big offseason breakdown of why isn't Rashod Bateman getting more targets despite getting open time and time again, I think the stat that stood out the most to me was he was behind Nelson Aguilar at a certain point for the amount of plays where he was the first read on it, which is obviously a pretty healthy indicator of just where you are in that wide receiver pecking order. And I don't know where Bateman stands right now, but considering it's him and Zay clearly as wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, respectively, with Zay being #1, it's not a surprise that he is getting more and more yardage. I mean, you just look at these past 4 weeks. He had the quiet game against Buffalo, 1 catch for 23 yards, but ever since then, it's been on a pretty steady climb. He had the 4 catches for 58 yards against the Bengals, the 4 catches on 4 targets for 71 yards against the Commanders. And then tonight, what does he go for? I think it's 4 catches again on 4 targets.
Yeah.
4 catches, 4 targets, 121 yards, and a touchdown. And the only play longer than that 59-yarder in his career was that play that I think, launched a million hard fanboy crushes in Baltimore, that catch and run score against the Dolphins in 2022, where he just turned on the afterburners and just dusted that Dolphins secondary. And I don't know if, because of the injuries and everything, Rashod will ever get back to that incredible blazing speed, but he showed tonight a couple times that he knows how to get open, and he is a really, really impressive player in the open field too.
Yeah, and I say the OBJ thing sort of jokingly because obviously that was still a very productive, very prolific offense last year. They have taken through 7 games a massive step up from that. But you do wonder if Rashod was just not being utilized correctly, not running the right type of routes, and just wasn't early enough in Lamar's progression, like you said, to be targeted enough to the point where he could not be as effective as he has been this year. He has just been dominant so far this season. And to catch his 4 for 4, another perfect day, just shows how that chemistry conversation that we were having in the offseason may have been just a little bit overblown. Maybe it just is, it's hard to hit deep sideline shots like the ones that he was running all of last year. And you think of the Chiefs game and the number of times that Lamar tried to hit him down the sideline. And maybe that's just not the right route for this quarterback and for this wide receiver. So impressive showing from Rashod Bateman, to be sure, but also got to give credit to Derrick Henry for putting this game on ice, being the closer that he has been in Baltimore. 15 carries for 169 yards. Jonas, he is 127 yards away from 1,000 rushing yards on the season. And those 23 rushing yards in the first half, he then, during that 2-minute drive by the Ravens at the end of the first half, Troy Aikman, Joe Buck were talking and lamenting about how he wasn't on the field, and it felt like a flashback to week 1 where Justice Hill is out there pass blocking and catching a lot of screens in that 2-minute drive. We're just used to that now. That's how the Ravens run their 2-minute drill, especially at the end of the first half. They like to go with Justice Hill because he can catch passes out of the backfield, because he can pass block. They like to use Derrick Henry more as the game goes on because that's when he is at his strongest, and he showed it again tonight.
873 rushing yards this season. That is more than 200 clear of Jordan Mason, who is the runner-up. Saquon Barkley, number 3. So not bad company for a supposedly over the hill, supposedly nearly washed running back. He's just a beast. Not just doing it. It's bizarre that on a day when he averaged over 11 yards per carry, he doesn't score on the ground, but he does score through the air. The one question I had for you, Paul, watching the TV, watching the telecast, did it look to you like he was surprised to see, was it Winfield kind of corner him on the 81-yarder? It, to me, just my mind's eye of recalling that first long run, it almost looked like he was surprised that a guy kind of popped up out of his peripheral, and then it was too late for him to cut back like he did, against the Bengals on that late put away run in overtime.
Yeah, he also did post, I believe, after the game, something like, "I'm slow as hell." Yeah. I should have broken that for a touchdown. I mean, 81 yards down the sideline is still pretty darn.
It was the fastest run of his season, according to Next Gen Stats. I think it was the third fastest. Well, no, it was that run. That it was the I think the 5th fastest run by any ball carrier this season, according to Next Gen Stats, and then the 3rd fastest run of his career. So he's setting some unrealistic speed standards for guys in that locker room. I was thinking about asking. So Pat Ricard, does seeing Derrick Henry run for 22 miles per hour make you wonder just how fast you really should be if you were putting in the work that you need to be your best self? But Pat Ricard weighs 300 pounds, so I did not do that.
Yeah, tough night for Patrick Card, also dropping that ball over the middle of the field. And Joe Buck mentioning on the broadcast, doesn't get many opportunities. It sucks when you drop the one. The tweet from Derrick Henry talking about that 81-yard run was, should have scored SMH slow AF, much love flock, and then a bunch of emojis. Yeah, I mean, just to have the luxury of having Derrick Henry to hand the ball off to when you amass the kind of lead that they had in this game in the second half. This is the script, right? It's take a lead, and they didn't have the first lead of the game because Tampa Bay came right down and scored a touchdown in 4 minutes and 30 seconds in a near perfect drive. But they got the lead early. They had the lead at halftime, and then they just gave the ball to the king, and he just rode it down the hill. I mean, there's the pregame segment on Monday Night Football on ESPN about how much he has invested in his body. And look, normal 30-year-olds don't do this. Normal 30-year-old running backs are not playing the best football of their careers. It's very clear Derrick Henry is just different. He is just a built different guy. And what he has done this season has been an utterly remarkable testament to how much time and effort he puts into keeping his body right.
And also a testament to the offensive line and a testament to Todd Monken. And I think also and primarily to just the gravitational force that Lamar Jackson exerts on these defenses. I mean, again, kind of going back to my hobby horse, my favorite advanced running statistic, the average yards before contact this week, Paul, for all the runners in the NFL was 1.49 yards. Do you want to guess what Derrick Henry's average yards before contact per rush was tonight?
It's got to be absurd. 6?
Just take a guess.
5?
8.27.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, that shows that the offensive line is clearing space for him. I don't know if he picked up. Now, you wrote on the BaltimoreBanner.com where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. You did a phenomenal breakdown of all of the stiff arms Derrick Henry has had literally in his entire NFL career. It is a shame, though, that he.
I don't think we got any good ones tonight. Did we?
The thing is, in rewatching that 81-yarder, he failed on a stiff arm on the defensive back that's chasing him down. We could have hit 160, Jonas.
Support local businesses, Derrick Henry. Stiff arm someone so I can tweet out my story. God damn it.
I mean, come on. You got to update that thing every week now. You have locked yourself into that. All right, let's get to the defense. We've spent long enough talking about how great this offense has been. And the defense started out the game pretty poorly. That first drive, Tampa Bay, as mentioned, comes right down the field, scores on 8 plays, 70 yards. Mike Evans is wide open in the end zone for a touchdown. Is facing zone defense. He gets past Brandon Stevens, who appeared to be concerned with the flat route. And then Marcus Williams does not close fast enough, and Mike Evans scores a pretty easy touchdown. Now, later in this game, Mike Evans, who was dealing with a hamstring injury coming into this game, aggravates his hamstring injury on a would-be touchdown that he drops in the end zone as he got a little bit of separation over Brandon Stevens. Him leaving this game in the first half absolutely unequivocally made a difference in this game because Mike Evans was close to dominant against this Ravens secondary. And we had massive concerns about both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans against this Ravens secondary. Mike Evans dominated early. Chris Godwin did his part before, unfortunately, leaving with a brutal injury in essentially garbage time in the fourth quarter. And you hope that he is able to recover from that injury because it sure looked devastating. But those two wide receivers proved to be another difficult test for this Ravens secondary that seemingly cannot handle top-tier wideouts.
Yeah, I guess I would push back a little bit on Mike Evans dominating because he did finish with just the one catch for 25 yards, touchdown. He probably should have had the other touchdown on the play where he got hurt. But I think from a bigger picture perspective, what he was doing, the fear that he was striking into the Ravens defense was significant. It was pronounced. Obviously you don't want to make too much about small sample sizes, but I did find it interesting just to kind of go back and look at some of the before and after splits. So just from kind of charting the different plays, I believe Mike Evans got hurt on the 26th play of the game for Tampa Bay's offense. So from play 1 to play 26, Tampa Bay was averaging about 7.2 yards per play, which is a very, very healthy number. That's like top of the league good. From 27 to 52, so basically the next 26, they fell all the way down to 4.3, which is no good. And it really felt like that. It really felt like that was a important inflection point in the game. And you look at how the Tampa Bay finished the game, especially after Marlon Humphrey left, and Baker Mayfield stabilized, and they got the outside kick, and guys just stopped really making plays downfield. The Ravens really needed that little bit of lull from Tampa Bay, because obviously the Ravens late game offensive script would have changed. I think if this were a tighter matchup in that fourth quarter, they wouldn't have thrown Josh Johnson out there for the kind of charity snaps when they were up 10 with about 2 minutes left for the three just simple handoffs. If it was actually a competitive game, they would have had Lamar on there. But the Ravens needed to take advantage of that period when Tampa Bay was kind of fizzing about, not really knowing what to do with their best jump ball X receiver out of the game. And the Ravens made them pay. That was the stretch when they really started to distance themselves from Tampa Bay. And, credit to them for doing that, because first quarter wasn't good. Fourth quarter definitely wasn't good. But that, 25, 30-minute stretch in the middle of the game, they did what they had to kind of put that game on ice.
And there is something, an element of luck to creating turnovers. I think part of it is just being in the right place at the right time. You see weird turnovers across the league. It just, is something that evens out over the course of time. And the Ravens had been somewhat unlucky when it came to forcing turnovers. They came into this game tied for 21st in the NFL with only 3 picks. They get 2 in the first half from Marlon Humphrey, who left this game right before halftime as he collided with Nate Wiggins on that second interception. Jonas, you are in Tampa. What did you hear from John Harbaugh, Ravens players, about how Marlon Humphrey is doing?
It seems there's optimism right now. I think if there wasn't, we would have gotten a pre-presser or introductory presser remarks from John Harbaugh, saying that we did this, we're happy about this, but unfortunately we have this bad news about Marlon Humphrey. Obviously don't know the lay of the land medically here, and I don't know. I assume they have all the testing that these teams do to look at knees and look at joints and ligaments and everything. Harbaugh seemed optimistic about Marlon. He said he was just kind of walking around the locker room post game. Gianna Hahn saw the same thing. He's going to get some testing done today on Tuesday when he gets back to Baltimore. Don't want to say that it would be wise to expect him back for next week, because you are facing a generationally bad passing attack that does not have really any, above average wide receivers to speak of. So I think the Ravens can afford to take their time if it's something like a knee bruise or a hyperextension or whatever. And I mean, even after Cleveland, you've got Denver and Bo Nix, and there's not a lot of talent on that passing attack either outside of Cortland Sutton. And I don't think that's a guy that Marlon Humphrey would even spend a lot of time guarding. Not to say that Marlon doesn't do a great job, as a blitzer from the slot or sticking his nose in there in run defense. But if the Ravens did indeed dodge this bullet, I think they can still get away with, feeling good about him missing just 1 or 2 games, because finally they're getting to that portion in the schedule where things get a little bit soft for the opposing attacks.
Yeah, and you wrote about during the offseason about how Marlon Humphrey last year, when he was in and out of the lineup as frequently as he was, played in 10 games, but didn't play all of those 10 games. It was always the game where he came back from the injury that he struggled the most. So give him a 1 game grace period as well. But I mean, he was
That's not how it works in the NFL.
No, it's not. He was the only thing that was stopping the Bucs offense in that first half, because that end zone interception that was just a bad decision, looked like, by Baker Mayfield. And then another terrible decision, throwing into double coverage. Could have been Nate Wiggins, could have been Marlon Humphrey to get that interception. So you just force him into those bad decisions. And it's like we said coming into this game, Jonas, if you force Baker Mayfield to hold on to the ball, you take away his first and second read, he will make mistakes, or he will generate sacks of his own. We saw Odafe Owe get a sack in this one. The pass rush seemed to be slightly better, I think you could say, in this game than what we've seen in the last few weeks. But you forced Baker Mayfield in critical moments into holding the ball and then making bad decisions. It was the first drive. He came right down the field. He was making quick snap throws, that was when they were at their most vulnerable. But when they had him locked up and they had him thinking and holding the ball for too long, that's when they were able to stop him.
Yeah, it was an interesting dichotomy on those first 2 picks because Baker had all day to look around and survey the red zone and the end zone on that first pick. And for some reason, maybe it's just a case of Baker being a relative short stack as a quarterback that he just did not see over his offensive line or over the kind of line of bodies in that secondary, and just threw a gifted pass right to Marlon. But on that second pick, I think it was Kyle Van Noy who comes looping around on a pass rush game. I don't know if he got close enough to Baker to actually deliver the hit and knock him off his feet, but he did get in the sight line, and that got Baker's heart a little, I think, all aflutter, and he made the unwise decision to throw that ball into kind of no man's land. And I think Marlon, had responsibility closer to the line of scrimmage, but he saw what the down and distance was. He saw the wide receiver behind him running that kind of vertical route, and he just said, "You know what? I'm going to try to undercut this." And he did do that. And obviously the landing wasn't as graceful as perhaps Marlon wanted, but assuming that this wasn't his last game, knock on wood, we're hoping to see Marlon back. For him to get 2 interceptions, setting a career high, 4 picks on a night like this, prime time, overshadowed pretty much only by Lamar. It's another step forward for, I think, what's been a pretty redemptive season for Marlon.
The redemptive season for Marlon Humphrey. On the offense, I think the counterpart would be Ronnie Stanley, who's had a phenomenal season, redemptive season as well. Let's get into the fourth quarter weirdness. 21 points for the Bucs in the fourth quarter. Felt like a reliving of the Dallas Cowboys game. It's been far too often that this Ravens defense has suddenly disappeared at the last 15 minutes of the game. In this game, it didn't really matter because the Ravens offense had built such a large lead that it was pretty much insurmountable for the Bucs. But it is a little bit frustrating that this ended up being a 10-point game when it could have been a much, much easier path to victory. And when something like that happens, when the game gets much closer than it should be, you see, unfortunately, injuries crop up. You saw the Chris Godwin injury that, frankly, if the Ravens had kept it at a wider margin, we wouldn't be seeing probably Baker Mayfield or Chris Godwin on the field. I'm not blaming anybody for injuries. I'm just saying it should have been a total laugher to the point where the Bucs had nothing to play for in the final couple drives of this game. And you see some unfortunate consequences by the Ravens not being able to wrap this thing up earlier. I don't want to overreact to it because obviously this game was still mostly in hand. There was still a 99% chance the Ravens were going to win this game for most of the fourth quarter. It's just a little bit frustrating that they ended up allowing 31 points in a game that was mostly a dominant performance.
Baker's fourth quarter stat line: 17 completions on 24 attempts, 196 yards and 2 touchdowns. There were only 4 quarterbacks this week who went over 100 yards in the fourth quarter. So for Baker to come within some garbage late game completion from 200 is not a great reflection on the Ravens secondary. I mean, I think we all just kind of threw up our hands wondering what the hell is going on out there on that. Was the last touchdown where it's the running back kind of leaking out, going across the grain, Roquan and Trenton or whoever was in the middle of the defense just don't communicate, and it's just a leisurely walk-in touchdown. We've seen that too many times. John Harbaugh's seen it too many times. He I think in otherwise relatively placid, John Harbaugh, because of just how well things had gone tonight, because of how transcendent his quarterback had been. I think the most pointed remarks, if you want to call it that, was him saying, our players are too good, our coaches are too good for this stuff to keep happening. And I was optimistic that because of the matchup of Brandon Stevens on Mike Evans, because of Marlon Humphrey on Chris Godwin, because I didn't think super highly of this Bucs offensive line, that the Ravens would be able to stymie some of this Baker Mayfield magic. There was a little bit of that definitely in that second and third quarter, but to let this guy pop off for almost 200 yards, almost 0.5 EPA per dropback, which again is just like Hall of Fame good in that final quarter with your starters still playing on both sides, it was frankly disappointing, and it's definitely going to leave these guys with a sour taste in their mouth as they come back to Baltimore. And obviously, there was stuff they could have done, not just communication wise and tackling wise, but they dropped a couple picks. They dropped a couple would-be drive vendors, and you just at some point need to make those plays, or you're just going to get the jokes about how that's the reason why you don't play offense, bro.
Yeah. That's why the cornerbacks are cornerbacks and not wide receivers. If you were hoping for this defense to be able to prove itself and to prove that it has fixed some things, this was probably your last opportunity to see some steady improvement from this defense before their Week 10 matchup at home against the Bengals on Thursday Night Football, because it's at Cleveland, it's home against the Broncos. Those are two offenses that are not good, especially Cleveland. Who the heck knows who they're starting at quarterback next week, but he's bound to be better than Deshaun Watson. Still, that offense is pretty much a mess, even with Nick Chubb being back. And we know Bo Nix is not exactly lighting things up in Denver. So they could look phenomenal the next 2 weeks. They could shut out the Browns. They could allow no touchdowns each of the next 2 weeks. That's not convincing me that this defense has fixed its issues. They have to do it against high-powered offenses. They have to do it against very good wide receivers, assuming Chase and T. Higgins will be on the field for the Bengals in a few weeks. Then, we won't get to see this defense really tested, I don't think, for another 3 weeks until Week 10.
Yeah, to quote the Canadian icon Shania Twain, that don't impress me much. if they shut down Cleveland, who cares? If they shut down Denver, it's a little bit less of a who cares, because they have been frisky at times. That offensive line, I think, is starting to show some signs of life, and maybe giving Sean Payton a little bit more of the balanced offense that he wanted. But again, these are not the speed bumps in like the Ravens schedule that compare to a Cincinnati or maybe even a Pittsburgh now at this point with what Russell Wilson did last night. It doesn't compare to what Houston might be on Christmas Day. The Ravens need to deliver something these next 2 weeks. I think, as you said, they really can't do anything to instill confidence, but they certainly can do a lot to make people lose even more of the faith that they might have already lost in Zach Orr and Dean Pease and John Harbaugh and all these guys that we thought would be anchoring one of the NFL's most talented secondaries. But again, we shouldn't talk too much about the bad vibes from this game, because so much of this game was a Lamar Jackson vibe fest. And I don't know if there's a better vibe right now than Lamar Jackson. I mean, I know I am anti-MVP discussion. I think the comparison, Paul, that kind of worked out in my mind was, it's like trying to talk about who's going to win the presidency when we haven't even had the national conventions. Like, this is where we are in the season-long process. But if you wake up tomorrow and seriously have Patrick Mahomes over Lamar Jackson in your personal MVP, power rankings, you need to reconsider what you're doing in your life, because that is not kosher.
We have to have a convention now on the podcast. And can I be the opening speaker for this convention? We'll take a roll call. We'll get people fired up. We'll have every celebrity come out of the woodwork in order to, Steve Kerr come out and give a speech in order to get Lamar Jackson the nomination.
Whose endorsements are we going to secure? Who possibly cares about our political platforms?
Not a one person. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Of course, read all of Jonas's great work on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Gianna Hahn is down in Tampa as well. We will have complete coverage from this win and a preview of the Browns game on Sunday. We'll have a podcast this Thursday, so tune in for that on the Banner Ravens podcast. Yeah, 2 days away.
2 days away.
Short week here for the Ravens, and short week for us, as Jonas is going to be hopping back on a flight. Thanks so much for tuning